Welcome, welcome. Tonight is going to be an exciting event, lots of content to get to and lots of chatting to have happen. So I am going to be very, very quick here at the beginning. My name is Emily Vetney. I've met a lot of you before. Good to see some familiar faces and also some new friends. That's always exciting. I work here in the advancement office, and tonight I actually wanted to introduce our new friend and colleague, Kylie Stein. She joins us from working in events in downtown Indy and has been with us since homecoming, I believe, was her first day on staff. So she's really new to the team. We are lucky to have her, and she will be taking over these whenever, wherever events after tonight. So, Kylie, if you want to say hi and let folks know who you
Yeah.
are.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name's Kylie Stein. Like Emily said, I've been on the team for about 3 months now. I am the new assistant director of special events and donor stewardship. So as we continue to do more of these events, you'll be seeing a lot more of me. So excited to be with you all.
Cool. And I am not going anywhere. I just work in the annual fund now. So you will hear from me a lot in less fun contexts, I'm sure, for all of you. But it's fun for me and it's good for the school. So that's what matters. With us, as always, is Ron Dostal, class of 92, the alumni engagement director. Ron, do you want to say anything or are you just saying hi?
Well, I will say hi. I will thank Eric and Ron for leading tonight's session and do a brief commercial message for everybody. We've got a great mix of some regulars to these after the bell sessions as well as some new faces. And so for those who are new, please know that we do sessions like this about every 6 to 8 weeks or so. So we'll look forward to an exciting lineup in calendar 2025. So hopefully you enjoy tonight and we'll come back early and often.
Cool. Thanks, Ron. Tonight we have, for the first time ever, an alumnus guest host with us, along with our professor, Eric Dunaway. Eric Dunaway, quick bios for both of them, is the BKT Assistant Professor of Economics here at Wabash, and he's been with us on faculty since 2018. He has a PhD in econ from Washington State. And he recently realized, according to his bio, that his love of math and all things strategery can be applied to one of his other favorite things, poker. So he teaches courses on poker and gaming, but also microeconomic theory, behavioral economics, the law and economics, and other things that as a history major, I didn't have to take. So I'm grateful to learn from him alongside you all. And then for the first time ever, we have an alumnus joining us tonight, Ron Rychlak, class of 1980 at Wabash College, is Distinguished Professor and Jamie L. Whitten Chair in Law and Government at Ole Miss. He is also Ole Miss's Faculty Athletic Representative, Chair of their Athletics Committee, and Secretary of the SEC Executive Committee. And he has either written or helped edit 12 books, including Gaming Law and Gambling Law, Cases, Materials, and Problems, which Dr. Dunaway says is literally the book on gambling law. So that's enough from me. I'm going to hush. And without further ado, Eric and Ron, please take it away and everyone enjoy.
Hi, everybody. It's great to see you, friends, colleagues, and of course, gentlemen. When Ron Dostal approached me a couple months to put together this talk for you all tonight, I was thinking to myself, well, if I gave this talk by myself, I'm just going to end up citing Ron for about the first half of it. So why not let the master himself give the presentation? So let me get the screen going, and I'm going to turn it over to Ron Rychlak, class of 1980. And let's get this going. All right.
Thank you very much, Eric. I'm delighted to be back participating with Wabash College. I think I saw Melissa Butler, who was a professor in my first freshman year, and I know retired recently. And I believe Melissa's iPad is on there. And so, Professor Butler, I'm delighted to see you. I follow you on Facebook. And regarding participation with Wabash, Matt Tanney has had me up several summers to talk to high school athletes and stuff. But okay, tonight's about gambling. I'm not here because I'm a gambler. I'm here because I'm a lawyer who's worked with gambling law. That started in the 1980s when I was practicing law in Chicago. And we represented Bally's, the people who make pinball machines. They got a contract with the Illinois State Lottery to put lottery machines in bars and restaurants. And they saw there was going to be a conflict with these machines and some things called gray area machines. Poker machines you may have seen in bars and stuff. that don't really have a spill out for money. It says for amusement only, but if you know how it works, the guy behind the bar will pay you the money. They want to get rid of those because that's going to be competition with the lottery machine, but they didn't want to touch Pac-Man and Centipede and Space Invaders and other games that were actually amusement games. But how do you draw a line between those two kinds of machines? Well, that was my job, and I had to figure that out. And ultimately, when I moved into academia, it's publish or perish, and I knew about gambling, and a lot of people didn't. And I feel like I caught a wave because there's been continual legal developments along the way, including current developments. The basics, however, consideration, chance, and reward, the elements of gambling, the bet you make, the indeterminate outcome, and the prize you win at the end. Eric, we can just go. I'm just going to point out throughout history, the ancient history, they found when the Romans occupied London, they were recently doing some excavations and they found not only dice, but loaded dice. And I was a picture of Robin Hood because when that supposedly is when King Richard the Lionhearted led the Crusades to the Holy Land. That's when the whole Robin Hood event took place. There are directives from King Richard to his men to put down the cards and dice, pick up archery and horse racing and foot racing, skills of war. This actually is that second element. Gambling, a lot of times, if it's based on skill, it's not considered illegal gambling. Chance is, skill is not. We can trace that back that far. We can actually also find directives from George Washington in the Revolutionary War telling his men to quit playing cards and dice and go sell the lottery tickets that were funding the army at that time. Okay, I need a signal so I can tell you. In fact, we think of lotteries as being sort of a 1980s since thing. In fact, lotteries funded much of the Revolutionary War. They were all across the colonies. There wasn't really a national currency at that time, but there were lottery tickets. And when you went from one colony to another, the lottery tickets that were used as currency in one colony were no longer available in this new colony. So there were exchange houses that developed. Many of those exchange houses developed into things like Chase Manhattan Bank today. They can trace their roots back to early lottery ticket exchanges. And there were lotteries all over. There were sanctions, including death penalty for counterfeit lottery tickets because it was that big of a deal. Interestingly, too, after the Civil War in particular, lotteries went away in about the 1820s. There was a revival after the Civil War when the South was devastated economically. A lot of states went to lotteries, most of them for a short time. Louisiana had its continue on for a fairly long time. But the thing that's fascinating to me, and really I think as a lawyer should impress anybody, when the states prohibited lotteries, and they all did except for Louisiana by 1870, everyone had gotten rid of it. They didn't just fail to authorize them. They didn't just put legislation in place making them illegal. They wrote them into their state constitutions that you will not have a lottery. In some states, that was interpreted to mean no gambling of any type. In other states, it meant simply no lotteries. But in any case, the fact that people who drafted the constitutions put in the state constitutions never to have a lottery should have raised more attention than I think it did. As most states, including Indiana, we'll talk about in a little bit, when they went to state lotteries, you had to amend the Constitution because the Constitution is prohibited. And during the time from basically the early 1900s until the 1980s or so, most gambling was illegal. We had gambling come to Nevada in 1931, I think is when it came to Nevada with Hoover Dam and the project and giving something for construction workers to do. During this time was, if you ever seen the movie The Sting, which I think is a wonderful movie, Robert Redford and Paul Newman, really, really fun movie. It shows this idea of this gambling house, and there's gentlemen there hanging out, and they're pulling scams and skills and gambling. there were really places like that. And there were some in Indiana. We don't think of Indiana that way, but there were some in Indiana, not only in the just outskirts of Chicago, which there were some major ones not far from Chicago. There's some that were sort of notorious over in Fort Wayne. And frankly, I think I have a slide about it later, but French Lick was also notorious for its gambling. It was a hideout for Al Capone and his group. When it comes to sports gambling was perceived to be both ancient. We can go back and find very early betting on horse races, camel races, foot races, all kinds of stuff. But also very, very bad. This is Tom Landry. Tom Landry, when I was a kid, perhaps the most respected man in America, the head coach of the Dallas Cowboys. And you can see legalized gambling is a disease as destructive as alcoholism or drug abuse. That was the perceived wisdom of the time. What does that come from? Well, there's Shoeless Joe Jackson in the middle. He was one of the 1919 White Sox who threw the World Series to the Cincinnati Reds. And then he was one who was then of the 8 men out, who's banned from baseball after that. That was, I mean, a baseball team throwing the World Series is about as black of an eye as you can give to to pro sports. So baseball drew the very hard line against legal gambling. But there have been other huge scandals. You see Pete Rose there. Of course, he just passed away, but we all know Pete is the all-time leader in hits and a bunch of other categories, and yet he's not in the Hall of Fame because he was banned from baseball, and that kept him from being put in the Hall of Fame. Tim Donaghy, an NBA referee who gave information to gamblers, spent some time in prison for what he did. There are other scandals too in college basketball in particular. So sports really tried to keep gambling far away. Here's just some of the college basketball scandals. And you know, Kentucky suspended its program after a point shaving scandal right after they won the NCAA, 1952. College athletes traditionally, things are changing today. But they're traditionally easy to pay off. That's what this article is about. This is Henry Hill, who is the character Ray Liotta plays in Goodfellas, wrote an article explaining how he convinced basketball players to shave points. Hey, you don't have to lose the game, just don't win by more than the number. Put $10,000 in front of them. Really hard for a college kid to pass that up, because I'm not asking them to lose. I'm asking them just don't win by too much. They take that, and once they take it, he owned them, right? I mean, he owned their soul. He owned their credibility from then on. Well, that's basically the state of gambling up until, in Indiana, at least until 1988, when voters amended the Constitution to allow the development of a lottery. I, by the way, spent a lot of my academic career arguing against the spread of lotteries, not because I'm a huge opponent of gambling. I'm actually fairly libertarian about whether people should gamble or not. I don't like the state being in the house running the game. And I think when that happens, once that happens, it's hard to draw a line anywhere else. And I think that's what we're seeing today. But in 1988, Indiana amended the Constitution, and they were able to have gambling, have lotteries. And that's when the legislature then later moved on to establish casinos. Most of them were riverboat, but the French Lick, when I was a kid, it was kind of decrepit. It was falling apart. But when I was in high school, actually, our band camp went and had camp here. So I've actually stayed at this place before it was a casino. But this was in the 1930s and 40s. This was high living. This is where Al Capone and gangsters from Chicago would come as a resort. Well, they've revived that, and they've got the riverboat places as well. Donald Trump had one in Gary, or outside of Gary, which had some interesting legal issues with that. But Indiana went for the casino, so that came next. the thing that held up sports betting from spreading to Indiana or elsewhere was the 1992 PAPSA Act. And that was the sorry, let me put this on real quick. I always Bill Bradley, slipping up there. Bill Bradley. Bill Bradley was a Princeton basketball star. He was an NBA star. He then became the senator from New Jersey, and he wanted to stop the corruption that he saw gambling bring to sports, professional and amateur. There, I knocked a bunch of stuff over. But go back just for a second. I mean, just so we understand this law, what it did was it said, if you have sports betting already, you can keep it, but no place else can add it. There's a 1 year grace period. If you could get in that grace period, you could have added it, but no one did, which locked legal sports betting into Nevada. That's why when I was growing up, when I was at Wabash, if you wanted to legally bet on sports, you had to travel. There was a federal law that prevented bets across state lines. So Nevada had this monopoly, and it lasted from really, I say 92, but I mean, it lasted from really the whole 1900s until 2018. Go to the next slide now, Eric. When the Supreme Court, in the case Murphy versus NCAA, ruled that PAPSA was unconstitutional because it restricted the state's ability to define its own laws. It's a complicated theory that it goes into, but basically was an overreach by the federal government. So the Supreme Court says PAPSA is gone, meaning states are free to have sports betting. Indiana, like Mississippi, where I live, had already positioned themselves so that once this law went out of play, gambling was prepared. They were prepared to go to sports betting. Eric. So today we find, I think 38 states have legal sports betting. 30 of them have app-based, phone-based mobile betting. There's 7 states now that are putting entire casinos on your phone where you can play roulette, dice, whatever, blackjack on your phone. But the big thing is the sports betting. It is restricted by state. So if you're in a state that does not authorize app-based sports betting, you can't do it. You come to Mississippi, you cannot do it unless you're at a casino. We actually allow it if you're at a casino. Tennessee, which has no casinos, allows sports betting openly. So there are a lot of variations. Some restrict gambling on college sports. We do not have prop betting on individual college athletes. You can bet college games, but no prop bets if it depends upon the performance of an individual collegiate athlete. So there are all kinds of different variations from state to state. And that's really what I just explained there. So you can go on to the next one. And then this is just a slide talking about the possibility of expanding further into actual full matters on games. And Indiana has had those discussions about being able to have an entire casino on your phone. I think I'm about at the end. So is that, Eric, is there another one? Or is that it?
That's the end. We'll do
Okay.
the handoff right here. And
All right.
It's a fascinating look at the history of kind of how we got here. It goes all the way back from the Wire Act to PAPSA or PASPA. I always get that one backwards. And to the end of it, where we see this race to legalization. So I kind of want to shift gears and talk about
Eric, before we shift gears, there's a question in the chat. Robert, class of 97, says, isn't the idea that if you can outprice the gamblers by compensating players, you kind of create a defense?
You can outprice the gamblers by compensating players. You can create a defense. Could you rephrase that question?
I'm not sure I understand it.
Yeah.
Sure. The idea is that the players are compensated so much the gamblers can't keep up with what the players are compensated either by the leagues and the teams or so on.
I understand what you're asking now. That is an argument in favor of NIL and of expanding revenue sharing with collegiate athletes, that if we allow them, that they've been easy to bribe because they have no money. If we give them more money, they'll be harder to bribe. I think there is some validity to that point. So the NCAA every year does a major survey of athletes, and they pick different topics. The most recent one on gambling showed that Division I athletes gambled less than Division III athletes. So Wabash athletes are more likely to be engaged in sports betting than Ole Miss athletes are. And I think part of that, yeah, and I mean, it seems funny, but part of it is that the Ole Miss athletes are looking maybe at having a career. They may have more money. They have more to risk. If they lose their eligibility, they're losing a lot. The average Wabash player would be, losing the opportunity to continue with the sport under the NCAA rules, but wouldn't lose. So I think there is a basis for that argument. Not sure, how significant it is, but there is something there.
And I'll agree with that, where the question amongst a Wabash athlete is less whether or not I should do this. I'll talk about this in the slides in a little bit, but the more the question is whether or not they will actually be caught, because monitoring for D1 athletes is quite different than monitoring for D3 athletes. So let's shift gears. We kind of have an idea of how we got here. Let's start talking about what we're seeing at Wabash, because I think there's an interesting picture here where our environment is a little unique compared to other colleges. So there we go. So I always like to start with this question, what is it about sports betting that just draws so many people in? Because when I say sports betting on Wabash's campus, I immediately have, 30 guys showing up to talk about it. I say it to even this group of alumni, and, we have dozens, if not 100 of you here to find out about it. And I think this answer, it actually has multiple dimensions. There's kind of an easy dimension to see this. And I think the obvious answer to it is that it's fun, right? I mean, putting a little bit of skin in the game makes the competition more fun to watch. It makes you feel like you're more of a part of it, because, I joke with this, but the only thing more fun than winning the bell game is taking a Danny's money when you do it. Am I wrong on that one? I mean, I think I'm right. But to me, if I were grading a paper and that was the answer a student gave me, I would probably tell them, was it rigged? I don't know. I don't know if the last bell game was rigged, but if I were grading this in the form of a paper, I'd probably ask them to go deeper, because what is it about the process itself about sports betting that's interesting? To me, and you'll have to forgive me because I'm both an economist and a numbers guy. I love math. It's always been a part of me. But I think sports betting is really interested if we think about it in a probabilistic sense. So I'm going to get into the math here. You're going to have to just bear with me. To explain what I'm talking about here, why I think it's interested, let's start with a simple example. Let's talk about roulette. All right. So I'm assuming most people know how roulette is played. You might know that the roulette wheel has changed over the last few years in Las Vegas. They've added a new space to the reel. Now we not only have 0 and 00, but we have 000 as well. So when we look at payoffs for a roulette game, all the payoffs are designed around an idea that a roulette wheel has 36 spaces. So if you bet your money on black 17, it pays 36 to 1. If you choose even, it pays 2 to 1. So it's always that assumption based upon those 36 red and black spaces. But the reality is that it has 39 spaces. There are 3 green spaces, which represent the 0, the 00, and the 000. So from my perspective, I can start doing calculations on that. I can calculate an expected value from this. And I'm going to find that when I do that, we can figure out that our expected value is going to be roughly negative 7.69% of whatever you wager. So we call that a house edge. On average, if you keep playing roulette over and over again, you're going to be leaving 7.69% of your money with the casino. And that's how casinos make money. they really aren't concerned with the individual wager. They want to get that long run average, take that 8% and build Las Vegas on top of it. It's a simple idea. There's no secrets there. I mean, it's just working in this context of what we would refer to as frequentist probability, because we're talking about frequencies of outcomes here. So contrast that with sports betting, and it's a true statement when I say that the true probability of any outcome happening in a sporting event is unknowable, because Texas is only going to play Georgia this last weekend once. And
Dr. Dunaway, we are still sensitive about that. Why would we bring that up? Welcome, Horns. Okay, sorry, but ouch.
Yeah, I had to rub that wound in. But
ouch.
There may have been a probability that Texas won that game 60% of the time if they had played that game over and over and over again. But they only play it once. We get a single observation. And so the whole probability theory we have about frequencies and the central limit theorem and the law of large numbers, we can't apply that to sports betting. It just doesn't work because we only get one observation of any single event. So all of that probability theory doesn't do anything. Sampling isn't going to work because it's a sample of one. So that's not great if we're thinking about probability, but it's really interesting from more of a thinking perspective about this. Maybe if I'm better at this than the book is, since they get one shot, I get one shot, maybe I can beat them. So yeah, we have to rely on this idea of creating subjective beliefs. And these subjective beliefs coming from the Bayesian school of probability, they're going to depend on just what we know, how what we know interacts with what we believe at the beginning, and we form new beliefs based upon that, and then we act upon them. So the point I want to make is, if my beliefs are more accurate than the sports books, then the edge goes in my favor. If I'm better on average, I'm going to win money from the sports book. And I think that's the secret ingredient right there, that we have a generation of especially young people that do think they can beat the book. That old adage of, in the long run, the house always wins. It may not actually be true for the sports book. Now, I'm going to be perfectly honest. If you're betting on Power 5 conference teams or the NFL, it's going to be really close to true. But you start thinking about mid-major teams. You start thinking about teams that are not in the top 50. The sports book is not putting a lot of effort into making sure those beliefs are perfectly accurate. There could be holes there. There could be holes to exploit. And so that's, I think a lot of young people, I think men in particular, are falling into this category where they actually think they can beat the book, because it doesn't matter how many numbers I actually show them, it's unknowable. So they've got a chance. And, all you got to do is give a Wabash man a chance and he'll go for it. So, yeah, we find that sports betting has just exploded in college age people, and men in particular. So we had a recent survey. I think the survey was from 2022 or 2023. I forgot to write down the date, but we found that 58% of college age people and 67% of men, they participate in at least one sports betting activity. For a lot of these people, this is one bet a year. Maybe they're betting on the Super Bowl or the PGA Championship. But we're finding there is a subset that is betting regularly, and even at concerning levels. So yeah, 33% of men report they're betting a few times a month. And we're going to find that 83% of our typical bets, they're $50 or under. But even in there, only 22% are in that $20 to $50 range. So I look at this and I kind of take it backwards. So you mean to tell me almost a fifth of our bets are over $50? You mean to tell me that, going that we're getting 40% or $20 or higher? The first thing I ever say to a Wabash man when I talk to him about sports betting is, if your idea of sports betting is betting $5 a week on the Colts, we don't have a problem. This is just fun. But when we start getting love Super Bowl prop bets, absolutely. But we find that with these larger bets, we got to think about where are students getting this money in order to use for them? What are they giving up to do it? And more importantly, how much are they losing? So I see a lot of questions right here. I'm going to circle back around to them in just a couple moments. So yeah, 4.5% typical bets are over $100. And just over half of the respondents to this survey, they reported losing more than $50 in a single day. And that does concern me as an educator. And we also have to consider that there are also racial implications for this. We find that our students of color are in these higher risk areas at twice the rates of our white students. So it's being targeted at different racial groups differently. And, it's concerning seeing this happen from my perspective. So continuing on with the data, the survey also categorized a group of students which we would call high-risk gamblers. And this had 3 criteria that we would see in this group. First, of course, is that they're betting either a few times a week or daily. Second is betting $50 or more in a typical wager. And third is losing more than $500 betting in sports in a single day. So take those 3 aspects. And again, to be high risk, you have to have all 3 of them. Okay. What proportion of Wabash students, and again, I don't actually have this data for Wabash specifically, mine is generalized across men. What proportion of men do you think fall into this high risk? So I'm going to give you 5 seconds to think about that, and then we're going to go with 16%. Oh, it's actually college-age people. That's men and women. 16% fall into this group, which we can reasonably expect the group for men is probably higher. So 1 in 6 is high risk. And we probably 1 in 5, 1 in 4 if we're thinking about men. That's concerning to me. So yeah, more than half of them are using some kind of mobile app to place their bets. That's probably the biggest change that we've seen since 2018 and before, is that the sports book has moved into your pocket. You're not calling a bookie to make these bets. You're not traveling to the casino. I joke with everybody, but you're doing this while you're sitting on the toilet in the morning. This is just kind of the pre-game ritual. You're putting in your bets before the game starts. So the sports book has really come to the home, and we're seeing its effect, especially in college-aged men. So yeah, and again, my problem here is that 70% of them strongly or somewhat agree that they could win a lot of money if they consistently gambled. And I can promise you that if 70% of them could actually do this, the sports books would not exist. So I see John Henry Reith in the chat right there. John Henry was one of the first students that ever took my behavioral economics class. He could probably tell you exactly what's going on with this, and that we have a problem with bad beliefs. So yeah, that's a problem. Let's circle back to some questions real quick. So I'm gonna get in.
So you
All
see
right.
Laurent up there is
Yeah. How will AI impact sports betting? I'm sure the pros are creating precise algorithms to increase their wins. Probably. And in fact, we have an AI expert in the chat right now. If you can see him, that's Matthew Jessup, Wabash class of 2024. He's the guy to ask this question. I would say right now they're going to be really good. The AIs are going to be really good at parsing the data for you, taking a lot of observations and organizing something for a human to analyze. I'm fully confident that an AI could be trained in order to make these bets. But at the same time, if we're looking at kind of like a Power 5 game right here, that market is extremely arbitrage. It's going to be hard to find an edge in there. But we'll circle back to AI towards the discussion part, because I think it's
Eric,
fascinating.
if I could put in
Absolutely.
one of the things that we see with sports betting, in particular with AI, is the ability to do the prop bets on a play-by-play basis. That kind of stuff just is not available with human beings running stuff. I mean, that's doing that. Also, there's a phenomenal podcast I was listening to today. Michael Lewis, the guy who did Moneyball and The Long Short and that stuff. He's got a podcast, one season devoted to fans in general, but a lot of it's about sports betting. And he talked about how DraftKings and FanDuel are using AI to assess the betting patterns of their customers.
Mm-hmm.
And the traditional bookie tried to get even money on each side. That's not really the way they're running, especially with prop bets. I mean, there's only if you're betting who's going to score the first touchdown in a game, there's kind of not another side to that bet the way there is with traditional sports betting. So they're not. If you're thinking about how IA can help make you or me an individual better performing gambler, that may take a while. Some of the stuff you said, I think, makes sense there. But if you look how the sports books are using it, I think there's some significant developments have happened.
Absolutely. So, all right, next up, I've got Robert. We got how does past playing experience figure in? I played high school football and basketball, so I know the game. Absolutely. I think that a lot of our college age students that are betting do have some experience with the sport in at play here. One of the students I track, former football player, he doesn't play anymore, but he's got a 9% ROI so far this year on betting mid majors in the NCAA, so he's doing pretty good on that one. He also runs the IMAs for Wabash. So, are there any correlations between the highest risk groups with sports betting and the highest risk groups with internet poker gambling? Absolutely. There are a lot of comorbidities in these, which I'll touch on that in just a little bit. We see JC talking some trash. James Cloud, JC, and John Henry, JH. They sat next to each other in my Econ 101, my very first semester at Wabash, and I'm thrilled that they're here with us tonight. Is horse racing included in sports betting? Horse racing is its own thing, honestly. Our NCAA athletes are not prevented from participating in horse racing. Basically, we think about it as any sport that has an NCAA championship. College age athletes are not allowed to place wagers on that, and there isn't a horse racing championship in the NCAA, so that's okay. It's a very different model. Okay.
It's pari-mutuel betting. It's a different model of gambling, actually. Yeah.
So let's keep moving, spawn some new questions as we go forward. So yeah, why are these numbers concerning? And I hope the answer to that one is pretty clear, is that it seems like we've got a problem. We see that college age students, and men in particular, they don't usually have enough education or experience to properly assess the risks that they're getting themselves into. And again, I go and I look to the data to see if these claims I'm making are bogus. And one piece of data I find on this one is looking at information from Sally Mae on credit card debt. So we found that the average credit card debt for college students increased from approximately $1,000 in 2016 to $1,400 in 2019. I cut this off at the pandemic because the pandemic does weird things. But in just a 3-year period, as we even, I'm not saying that the repeal of PASPA has anything to do with this, but we see that young people are taking on a lot more debt, 40% increase. And this is a group, they don't get interest rates like I get. They get interest rates that are much worse than what I get. And we're seeing them taking on a lot of debt. And so the idea that they may not be able to properly assess risk, that appeals to me. Maybe they don't really understand what they're getting themselves into. And again, like the question said, we're going to find that gambling addiction has really high comorbidities with alcohol use and other addictive behaviors. We find in some cases it's a substitute. Instead of binge drinking, they'll make a whole bunch of bets. And a lot of times we're going to find it's a complement, that they go hand in hand. You'd have a bad night in the sports book. Well, you kind of drink that one away. So this is extra important because we're really concerned about mental health on college campuses. Students seeking mental health service has gone up tremendously over the past decades. And so this is becoming another factor in what's contributing to mental health problems that we're seeing in our students. So yeah, neuroscience tells us the brains of young men are not fully formed until at least the mid-20s. Absolutely. So there are gaps here, and we're finding that it's hurting our students.
Eric, there's a question above that one too from John C.
How do fantasy sports figure into regulations risk? So for the longest time, fantasy sports has been considered skill, not luck. And that's how they've skirted around all of the legal framework. Correct me if I'm wrong, Ron, on that one. That fantasy football was considered a game of skill.
That was their argument, which some states bought and some states didn't, but a lot of states that didn't buy it modified their laws to allow it.
Yeah. And so it figures in the same way. We find that, if you're playing in your fantasy league and there's a buy-in, it's probably not as significant, but we're seeing these weekly fantasy betting venues, with DraftKings, with that's FanDuel, where you can assemble your fantasy lines and then create markets based upon that one. Not this summer, but the summer before, a student and I were doing research on that. We were developing a model to predict DraftKings behavior. It was a lot of fun. Didn't quite get it done in one summer, but I look forward to going back to that eventually. So, going back to the slides right here, yeah, over half of our student body at Wabash, they report some kind of gambling behavior over the past year. Now, this is all gambling behavior, so I want to be careful about that one. And truthfully, if I'm thinking about this one, I would guess that this data was biased downward. It's biased because it's small sample size. Our sample size wasn't good enough for me to really make a lot of conclusions about this, but if I were guessing the bias, I'm going to guess it's downward biased. So if I combine that with the fact, and this one I know, that 53% of Wabash students are NCAA athletes, well, that takes away any kind of plausible deniability that I might have in saying that our athletes aren't betting. I can pretty safely conclude that, yeah, we've got a problem with Wabash athletes participating in sports betting as well. So that's kind of when we realize that we have students that are willingly, and they know what they're getting into. There's not a problem with education about sports betting in Wabash's athletics. They know what they're doing, but they're choosing to do it anyways. So, in some conversations I've had with them about this, I asked them why they're doing it. And I said this before, that it's never a question of whether they should or shouldn't do it. It's the question of whether a D3 athlete is actually going to be caught. That's kind of their logic when they choose to do it. And that concerns me that, students, again, kind of back to Ron's point, they're probably not continuing on in the NBA. They don't have athletic scholarships. To them, the risk side is low, so they choose to do it instead. So, yeah, how do we fight this? What do we do in order to kind of combat this? We want to stop for questions, Emily?
Well, there's a question and a comment. We've got a comment
okay.
from Mike R. and then a question from Ken Schild.
All right. So, what about betting on World Series or Super Bowl? Is that prohibited? Yes, because there is an NCAA championship in football and there is a baseball championship in the NCAA. Our sports athletes cannot bet on either of those sports. I always joke with the students that if they really need to bet on something and they're an NCAA athlete, they should stick to horse racing or rugby, or they could bet on cricket. There are robust betting markets for cricket in Europe, and it's a fun thing to watch. So, yeah, it is a prima facie violation of the gentleman's rule. I do agree with that one. So, the risks seem non-existent at the time. Absolutely, John Henry. But getting back to that, it's like, what do we do? How do we fight this one? And I think the answer, I'm a broken record as a Wabash professor. I do think the answer is education, because let me frame this for you guys right here. If you're a Wabash man and I tell you not to do something, what are you going to do? If you're the answer that you're thinking of is to do it twice as hard, you're probably correct, and you're probably the average Wabash man. So I can't fight this by saying, oh, you shouldn't be doing that. So that path is kind of out the window. I can appeal to the gentleman's rule, and I do appeal to the gentleman's rule for this one, but I'm a bit more sneaky in my tactics in this one, and my secret weapon is education. So if I know you're going to do it, based upon what you know, what I have to change is what you know. So maybe instead of talking about why you shouldn't do it, maybe I'll teach you how to get good at it. That's my secret weapon right there. Maybe I can teach you how to analyze it. And as you learn how to analyze it, maybe you'll properly understand the risk and you'll stop doing it. Or maybe I'll take the win if you do it less. That's always my goal right here. So yeah, the benefit, if you want to call this a benefit, is that I have an entire generation of young men that are interested in statistics. And that is a gold mine right there for getting students to learn about these things. Instead of teaching them using data about, the classic one that we use in econometrics at Wabash is the gender wage gap, because we have so much data. I can see Matthew Jessup twitching when I say that. What we can do instead, what if we use sports data? we have robust data access for even the most recent NCAA games over the weekend. We can access that. What if we use that and all of a sudden I can teach percentiles by having them compare the yards per game of running backs across the NFL? All of a sudden, I've got my guys making arguments that they didn't want Ezekiel Elliott because he was only a 62 percentile running back. And at that point, I feel like I've already won. When we start looking at that, we start getting them to analyze it. Yeah, so it's an opportunity. So the idea being that we need to teach them the math and the accounting involved. And yes, proper sports betting requires accounting because we need to make sure we're tracking our wins and our losses properly. We're tracking our balance, and we're learning to keep that money separate from money that we use for critical activities. We need to learn how to create budgets for that. We need to learn how to make sure one pile of money is not touching another pile of money. So maybe if I can teach them about the house edge involved with sports betting and they keep better track of their records, maybe they'll make more informed decisions. And my sample size for this so far is small. I've only been working with maybe a dozen or 2 dozen students at Wabash. I'm seeing promising results already. Usually I catch wind of who the big sports bettors are on campus and we start talking about it. And they're always willing to come to my talks because I'll teach them the math involved as long as, we're being careful about this one. So
Professor, is now a good
yes,
time for a question?
yes, let's take a question.
Thanks. Peter Durant, class of 70, says he doesn't bet much on sports and so he doesn't know a lot about this field. But are there prediction markets that could be used like betting on the presidential election?
There are betting markets for all of these things. So we find that you can bet on almost anything in the US. Someone will form a market. They were betting on pretty much every single election we had. But yeah, and go Lions. That's who actually I'm cheering for to win it all this year as well. As a Seahawks fan. As long as it's not the 49ers, I'm happy. But to kind of showcase this, this is what I'm up against. So if we look on the screen here, this panel on the left, actually both of these come from a terrible program that our students use on campus called Yik Yak. It's an anonymous social media app that allows them to just make these posts. And so I patrol this app, just kind of, it's a great way to get the heartbeat of our students. But I see posts like this. So this one on the left was earlier this year, like who wants to learn how to bet on football? And they're posting something from their Picket app. On the right, this was actually a student who knew I was watching and asked me to evaluate this 3-leg parlay that they had just wagered on. And I find these are fascinating because if you look at the one on the left, where are your eyes drawn is the first thing I'll look at that. What do you see when you see that? The first thing I hope that most everybody sees is we get attracted to that color green on there. We see that this student has won 23, 40, 65. Okay. And I think that's where a lot of people stop looking at this. But me, when I look at this, my eyes go right here. The 1960-2. I look at the record because to me, that tells me that we're probably looking at a very small swing. We're probably looking at really high variance betting right here. This student has probably gotten really lucky once or twice to get this outcome. And if I had them doing this over and over again, we're probably not seeing it. So I have a bad tendency to post when I see these. I ask them the next week how they're doing, and they don't reply to me. So that's probably giving me the answer that I'm really looking for right there, that we're seeing variance playing heavily right here. But actually, I want to focus on the second one, the parlay here, to show you what I mean when I'm talking about education for sports betting, because it's more than just, understanding the risk. We can calculate the risk, and we can learn how to take these money lines, turn them into probabilities, and assess what the sportsbook's actually offering. All right, from Robert, so how many have attended your talks to become bigger winners? So right now, I only have 2 students who are actually feeding me their data. And again, their average ROI is about 9 to 10% right now. But these 2 they're both economics seniors. They're both very much data junkies. And they're not putting, $100 a game. They're doing $5 over the course of probably 20 to 30 games per week. and they're experiencing this. So I feel like they're doing a pretty good job, but we look at their accounting and how they're doing with this too. We are properly assessing their risk. So it's a hobby for those guys. Now, so I want to show what I was talking about when we're talking about with this previous parlay. So what a money line is it's a subjective probability. It's basically, you can read a money line is that if it's negative, you think that that event is more likely to happen. If it's positive, you think it's less. So a money line of negative 109 means you need to bet $109 on this for the chance to win $100. Whereas the money line of plus 111 means you have to bet $100 for the chance to win $111. So it's different, but that's just a math formula right there. We can take that and we can convert that into a probability. And I'm not going to bore everyone with math too much today, but basically I can take those three numbers using a very simple formula and I can convert them into implied probabilities. So those probabilities for Colorado winning was 0.52, for Utah winning was 0.67. You know, as it gets more negative, it's more likely. And for Virginia Tech winning was 0.47. Now, let's take what we know about a parlay. What a parlay is that we have three events and all three of them have to happen at the same time. And from probability theory, we know that if we have three different events that all have to happen at the same time and they are independent, I can just multiply these probabilities together. So I am assuming that these are independent events. I feel like my assumption's pretty good. The only time I wouldn't think about independence in events is if it was like week 17 in the NFL. Those are definitely not independent. But I felt like this one was good enough that I could assume that one. So what I can do is I can take those three values, I can multiply them together. So my implied probability of this parlay hitting is just 0.17. Just those three numbers. Well, if I can go from money line to probability, then I can definitely go backwards. I can go from probability to money line. I just got to go backwards through the formula. So let's take this 0.17 and let's turn it back into a money line. I do that and I get plus 504. So, okay, we've got something here. Now that 504, there's probably just a tiny bit of rounding error in there, but we see a number on there. We see what the sportsbook was offering to the students. And no, it's not the 508. The original offer they were giving you was 339. That's what the sportsbook was offering for this parlay. But they're nice. They're giving you a 50% profit boost in order to bump those odds up to you to 508. So what that tells me right there was that wasn't a deal at all. They were just giving you what you would get from betting those three individually in the parlay as their really good deal. When in reality, the original thing they were going to offer you works out to roughly a 6% house edge. So it's the roulette wheel all over again. By taking individual bets and repackaging them as a parlay, you're on average giving up 6% of the value of those bets just for the opportunity to get a higher paying bet at the end of it. And so when students come ask me, what's your number one tip for sports betting? I'll share it with everyone here. Don't do parlays. Parlays are just giving money to the sports book. That's number one. But man, we see that big number and we see that chance. Maybe I can hit that big. It's attractive, but it's a worse deal overall than just betting them individually. So yeah, we only break even with the boost here, and they don't give you a boost every time. So the sportsbook is definitely taking a bigger cut on this one. So all right, I ran the numbers of my bets. I would win 70 to 80% in 1 year. I was only getting a return about 50%. Okay, I don't think there's a question there, so we're going to keep moving on.
Yep,
But-
and I do want to note, professors,
Yeah.
we're about the 5-6 minute mark of our
Okay,
total.
we're almost done, and then we'll open up for some conversation. But yeah, this is just one example. So what if we teach them about mental accounting and how their small bets are meant to be forgotten? For those of you who have experience with sports betting, what happens when you win? What does that app do? It gives you all the fireworks, gives you the confetti. It celebrates those huge wins. What does it do when you lose? It's like, oh yeah, we're going to color that gray. We're going to make sure you don't see it. They're focusing your attention to when you win, not when you lose, because they want to make you feel like you're good at this. because if they can make you feel like you're good at this, they're going to keep you betting. What if we teach you, color apps? Sorry, I was getting ahead of myself. The mental accounting is going to be that what if they keep offering you small stakes bets where you keep making those $5 bets, and before you know it, you've made 20 of them. You've bet $100, but no, it wasn't $20. It was $5, 20 times. It was just tiny. It was just pizza money. It's not pizza money anymore when we start talking about 3 figures in your betting account for that day. So we lose track of the small ones. What if we teach about how variance interacts? What if we teach them the most important rule of poker? And I'm bringing everything back to poker because it's what it is for me. That you can make every correct decision and you can still lose. That's what the bettors need to understand. You're going to have wild swings of variance, that you could have had the ultimate line on a game and still end up wrong. That's just how life works. So what else could we teach them? How could we leverage the liberal arts and use it to help people understand what they're getting into and understand how to make better decisions? I think that's been Wabash's goal the whole time. And this is just my way of how I like to do that. And I know my colleagues in other departments, they have things that they can teach as well, that we can help students, we can arm them with that information, and we can trust them to make a good decision. So, I don't think sports betting is going away anytime soon. If we look at the data, the revenue from sports betting just last year was $21 billion. Compare that to the NFL. The NFL's revenue last year was $23 billion. I think sports betting is going to pass the NFL this year. I give it another few more years. It's going to pass the entirety of professional sports. The secondary market will become bigger than the primary market. So, and we see this beyond, by the way, for those of you who have young children or grandchildren, pay attention to how our children are being conditioned to gamble at a young age. If you don't believe me, I encourage you to walk down a toy aisle. I have young children, so I see this, and it's kind of repulsive to me when I see this going on. We find that loot boxes are all the rage amongst boys. They want to open up loot boxes in their games. They want to, pull on their slot machine and get their rewards. It's conditioning them to gamble. We find for girls it exists as well, but they're called LOL surprises, and they have been banned in my home because they make a mess and because it's gambling. So we're seeing this happen. And by the way, looking at the data, when students cross the legal age of gambling, most of those gambling behaviors go up, but one notably goes down. The one that goes down is loot boxes. So we have strong evidence that they were already gambling before. They're just changing it from what they could do before the gambling age to what they can do now that they reach gambling age. So fascinating. And again, I think the answer is that we have to arm students with knowledge and give them the skills to properly assess the risk from sports betting. From there, we just got to count on them to make the best decisions for themselves. And I have faith in these guys. I believe in them, and they rarely ever let me down. So they tend to get it right once they have the information and the ability to do it themselves. So everyone, that's the end of my part of the talk. So let's open this up. We're at the 8:30 mark right now, but if Ron's cool with it, I'm fine with sticking around for a little bit of time to just chat about this and answer the burning questions you all might have. Do me a favor, though. Please type your questions in the chat, or if you just want to write that you have a question there, we'll let you come and ask it on the audio so we can all hear that. So I'm gonna.
Eric, there's one already in the chat from 3 minutes ago. I told him to hold his horses for just a second.
Yeah.
Matthew, class of 20. Do all sports books have the same parlay odds, or are some more favorable to gamblers?
He goes by Fight Sauce, by the way. He was the first person to take multiple classes with me. So
all right.
Fight, it's great to see you. So, do all sports books have the same parlay odds, or are some more favorable to gamblers? From my experience, they're slightly different. I have been trying to actually nail down the house edge for sports betting, but it is incredibly hard to do. The reason why is because I don't know how they're calculating it. So I've actually talked with Ron about this question before. It's just like, are they taking a situation? Are they adding something to it? Are they taking something and are they multiplying it? I don't quite know what the function is. And I've probably simulated about 8 to 10 different ways to do it. And I'm finding a house edge ranging anywhere from 3 to 8% looking at this. So it's really tough, but we do see that sports books do tend to offer different ones. And I think that comes down to their analysts, how certain they are. What you will notice is, especially in prop bets, if the sports book is uncertain about any particular event happening, you're going to find that baseline bet odds are going to be worse. So if they're pretty good about it, they think they know they've got it 50-50, they're going to offer you the negative 110 on all of them. But if they aren't as certain, it'll be a negative 115 instead. That's just them hedging their bets for a little bit more uncertainty and giving them a bit of a higher house edge at the same time because they're just not sure about it. So.
Another one just came in the chat, but it's nested underneath. John C asks, do you explore the science of dopamine and addiction, etc.?
So I don't, but my colleagues in psychology definitely do. So Preston Bost works a lot with cognition, and his specialty is in the conspiracy theories in that one. But he'll do that. Bobby Horton works with what we see in the social sphere. So how we're having fun together. And Eric Olson is going to work with child development. So they're definitely looking at this one, but that's not my thing. Is house edge different from the house edge of blackjack? Oh, blackjack house edges. There's something speaking my language right there. So the house edge in blackjack, if you have four decks in the shoe, blackjack pays 3-2. It doesn't anymore in Vegas, by the way. It's down to 6-5. And if you're playing perfectly with standard play, house edge is 0.45%. That means if you're playing perfectly and not counting cards, you're giving 0.5% of your money to the casino. If you're counting cards, house edge goes negative, and that's why they kick you out of the casino for doing that. But that's the best you could possibly do. That's mathematically perfect blackjack. You're still losing money if you're not counting cards on average. So no, great questions. So I like to joke, as I've dug more into kind of the economic side of gambling, that gambling is a story, and I think Ron can talk a lot about this too, but the story of scoundrels and nerds is what I always say, that we'll see a pattern throughout history that there's a scoundrel who's just come up with a new game to try to win some money. And they've shown it to their friends, but they just can't quite figure out why they're losing on average. And so they approach other friends of theirs who are nerds. So I can't remember the name of the scoundrel in the 17th century in France. What was his name? Chevalier Dumont or something?
Sounds right.
Sounds right. So he was trying to figure out a dice game, and he approached his friend by the name of Pascal, asked him what was going on. Pascal turns around and invents modern probability theory from that. My personal field, game theory, it only exists because John von Neumann was trying to figure out how to win at poker. We can trace so much of our statistics and probability knowledge back to gamblers. And so if we think about what the direction of causation is there, it was the gambling first that led to the mathematics, not the other way. So
got two more questions that came in the chat, professors.
Yeah.
Mark Walker, as a father of 2 teenage girls, can you give parents some things to be on the lookout for or telling behavior about a gambling problem?
So for a gambling problem, it's more difficult, but if you're wondering if the toys you're buying for your kids are gambling, look for instances where you buy them something, they open it up, and then they discover that they already have it to the point where they didn't get something new. That suggests that what they're actually getting is an unknown. It's a random process, and that they're kind of falling into that. The idea that they want to get the rare one, so you got to keep buying it to get another draw to try to get the rare one. So,
and then Mark Bevelheimer, we know that states make money on lotteries. Do states also make money on sports betting in addition to taxing the winnings?
I'm going to pass that one to Ron. Oh, that way.
Well, it's taxing the winnings, and it's licensing the operators. So yeah, there's a lot of money that comes. That's why the states do it. The states do it because, and it varies very much from state to state. I think there's states that tax up to 50%. There's states that are as low as about 9% on sports betting. But absolutely, it's very profitable for states.
And going into Robert's comment as well, I think we all like to be smarter than others, and gambling provides a concrete reward for that. We got to be careful with that. We all like to think that we're smarter than others, and the sports book is happy to let you think that you're smarter than others. So whether or not we actually are, that's the question right there. But the sports book's always going to make sure you feel like you're smarter.
All right, a question from Dave. Have you ever tried to redirect someone from placing a sports bet and instead invest in a sports betting company? Which would have a better economic outcome?
That would be awesome. But I think, I don't blame young men for this one, that we find that their perspectives are very short term. We find that they're not taking a long-term perspective on things, and I don't blame them. When I was 20, I wasn't thinking about the future either. What's more fun, putting your money away and forgetting about it for 40 years, or betting on the Colts this weekend? I find that 99.9% of them are probably just going to bet that money on the Colts. It would be great, and I would love it if some of our students went on into careers where they actually built those companies. I think that would be an incredible career path that Wabash arms them well for.
Right. Any more questions? We have got a few more minutes, but then we do have to go to sleep so that we can go and engage with alumni again tomorrow. Yes. Oh, wow. A long question. Eric, I'm going to turn that over to you. Woo.
Do you think the potential of the commoditization or potential for a federally related exchange will be the next evolution for sports betting in America? I'm going to answer that part. So that's a fascinating question, and I'm actually writing a paper on that right now. So I'm co-authoring a paper with Professor Nick Snow, who's also in the economics department. By the way, shout out for Nick Snow. He found out today that he received tenure, so big congratulations for him. We are arguing that government regulation for sports betting is actually unnecessary because it's an incredibly well self-regulated market. And by that, I mean, so when we have an athlete who's going to go make a bet, who catches the athlete? The answer to that question is the sports book itself. The sports book has a vested interest in monitoring who is making those bets and making sure that people who aren't eligible aren't making those bets, because those people have insider information. And that gives them an unfair advantage and will cause the sports book to lose money. So that argument is that, the government intervention may not be necessary in that regards. The question on the sides of whether or not we need to keep young people from doing it, that's tougher. Because where do we draw the line when a person can make the decision for themselves? Because it's already at 21. I mean, I don't see any feasible way to make that any higher, if you understand what I mean by that. It's already at the farthest we can get with it. So hopefully that answered that question. Sports franchise values increase by multiples if they can run their own books. Yeah, so that question from Thomas is actually really fascinating as well. We have 2 NFL teams that have sports books right in the casino now. That's the Las Vegas Raiders and the Washington Commanders. We're finding that with the data collection for NFL teams, Brent Harris can talk about this forever. They've had to add not 1, but 2 positions into the stats collecting team just to handle sports betting. So that in the case of a prop bet, because you can bet from the stadium itself, we find that, a cornerback goes down right before a play is snapped, and someone sitting in the stands could bet that wide receiver is going to get a touchdown. They actually have to keep people on site to quickly lock those bets out when that insider information can kick in. So, and again, that goes back to kind of the argument I was going to make, that it's the incentives for the sports book are really strong in order to make sure that this market does not suffer from insider information.
All right, folks. With that, I want to go ahead and thank you all for coming. Thank you to Dr. Dunaway and Dr. Rychlak. Thank you so much for being here, professors.
I'll end it by saying that I do feel like there is a sure thing that we all could bet on. And that thing is, of course, a Wabash education. So rest assured that, we haven't faltered in almost 200 years, that we are making sure these young men are armed with what they need. I can see Fight smiling. That's how I know it's true. Okay. So
that was suave, Dr. Dunaway.
Thank you all for joining us tonight.